Kia ora, my name is Katie Wesney. I am delighted to be with you tonight to present our webinar on wealth creation, leveraging opportunities. It's a tough environment out there for lots of people, but definitely opportunities to be had. Fortune always favours the brave, and that's what we're going to focus on tonight. What are the things we need to be doing to ensure that we maximise over this time, because there are definitely opportunities to be had. So we'll just wait. There's a few more people coming through. A little bit of housekeeping while we wait. There's a chat box. Thank you to all those who have submitted questions previously. Amazing array of quite different questions, actually. So thank you. I'm going to answer those questions at the end. But as we progress, if anything resonates or you have any questions, you just pop them in the chat box below, and my amazing producer Jess will collate those and we will go through those at the end. And before we commence into the meat of the presentation, just a wee disclaimer. Obviously, this presentation is provided for information purposes only. The content of this presentation is not intended as a substitute for regulated financial advice. If you do want that specific advice, I really do recommend you reach out to an expert to assess your own situation. Obviously, I'm going to give you lots of tips and tricks. I hope they're really tangible. But again, different things will relate to different people. So keep your wits about you. I will talk at pace. We're on a limited time frame. There is lots to cover off. I've got lots and lots of slides. So let's just kick things off and people will catch up. We will send you out a recording after this if you wanted to watch it again at desperate times, or if you wanted to show it to your partner. So we will be sending a recording if you get waylaid, etc., or want to watch it again. So a little bit about me. I am the head strategic coach for Enable Me. I've been doing this for the last decade now. There's nothing I haven't seen. I'm also a chartered accountant. I trained at KPMG 1,000 years ago, and obviously I'm also a qualified financial advisor. My job is to help people get ahead faster and they're naturally on track to do so. We try and do as much heavy lifting for our clients in terms of making sure they get to where they need to be with the least amount of effort in the shortest amount of time. That is my job and I love it. What we'll cover tonight, why you want to grow wealth. Pretty obvious, but we'll go through it together. Wealth building principles. There are rules around all of this. You understand them and then you execute on them. Understand your timeline. That affects the strategies you should be leaning into or what's available to you. Let's understand that together. How that translates to creating a personalized wealth plan, your options, and everyone has the same base options available to them. They've got different risk and rewards though. Let's understand that. And adjusting your plan for your individual goals. I'll reiterate the key takeaways and then we'll go through those questions. So again, lots to cover off. So we're going to start off. I want to be really directive over this webinar tonight. What do you currently invest in? We'll just do a wee poll. There's options. New Zealand Super, KiwiSaver, investment property, shares, managed funds, term deposits, high interest savings, or nothing at all. Of all those investment options, nothing's wrong. So just, yep, I'll be really interested to know. So that'll pop up in a minute. So just select what you can. And why do we grow wealth? At a very base level, you're just trying to create yourself more options. You want to improve your security. For lots of people, they're trying to solve a problem. Generally, that problem might be retirement, or they want to help their kids. Some people want to retire earlier. We want to understand your problem because that dictates the wealth creation strategy that's right for you. None of my clients come to see me. I'll call this out straight away because they want to be fine. All of my clients come to see me because they are ambitious and they want to make the most of their position. So what's the problem we're trying to solve? 65% of Kiwis are worried they're not on track to afford a comfortable retirement. Um, so if you're feeling that way, don't feel alone. 56% of Kiwis don't feel prepared for retirement, and 70% of Kiwis think they may need to work past age 70. Um, I hear often from clients initially, oh, I love my job. Do you know what? I'm just going to keep working. And I love that they love their job. I obviously love my job too. It's just, I refuse, unless absolute necessary, to design a plan based on you having to work to make this okay. For lots of my clients, they may choose to work past 65, but there is such a critical difference to having to work and doing it because you want to. Quite a different prospect. And again, future's promised to no one. Just because you think you might want to doesn't mean you can. Health, opportunities in the market, etc. 60% of Kiwis haven't thought about how much they'll need for retirement. We're going to put some numbers around that together at a very base level. Everyone's different, but there's a wee formula around that. And how much you will need to retire comfortably depends on how you want to spend your retirement and when you want to retire. And often people say, do you know what? I'm pretty lean. I'm not material. I don't need much. It's really interesting when you unpack that, how much you do need at a base level. And there's studies that we use just as a very baseline. But critically, everyone is different. We have a baseline, but everyone's different. So again, let's understand that. It comes down to whether you live rurally, in a city, the lifestyle, if you want to travel, where you live, and again, non-negotiable that we get our clients mortgage-free, and whether you're retiring at, before, or after 65. So that all plays into how much you need and what you need to be doing to execute on a really clinical plan that gets you to where you need to be. There's a rule of thumb that I use. So as a really rough hack, if you retire at 65, my job in terms of retirement planning is to get you to at least 90, living a life that's comfortable to you. So at a very base level, how I figure that out is I understand around 60% of your pre-retirement income per year after tax is what we need to be coming up with in terms of asset position or passive income that we can draw upon for the next 25 years to get you to 90, retiring at 65, essentially. So that's kind of the really rough number that we work towards with our clients. And I always think the bigger the landing pad, the more options that we have always. And it's never too early to start. When should you start on your wealth creation journey? I love that saying, best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is today. Lots of people come in and they also worry if they've left it too late. It is never too late. It's just, again, the runway to retirement will often dictate the strategies that we lean into, whether we like it or not. So how do we define a wealth plan? So a wealth plan brings together different asset types and a hold sell strategy that provides cash flow to meet those financial goals. So your version of a good life, essentially, is what we need to be facilitating from that asset position when you no longer work. And I am agnostic to where my clients invest. Of course, I want to make sure they have a really well-diversified, robust plan, that we are resilient from a cash flow perspective. But again, I'm not here to manage funds, property, etc. It is what speaks to my clients and what should they lean into to get the return they require to sort their own problem in terms of their financial plan. So there's rules, again, in terms of the design around that plan. it can never be set in stone. It can't be, you write it down and then it is what it is forever and a day. Life's not like that. I love that saying, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And we're generally continually punched in the face through our lifetimes. So again, our plans got to be flexible. I mean, look at COVID, for example. No one saw that coming. So again, if a plan set in stone quite quickly becomes irrelevant to you, it needs to be flexible, dynamic, non-negotiable. It has to have a really good buffer. Non-negotiable for all of my clients. What does a buffer look like? Should be at least 6 months of cost load that's accessible to you. That could be in a line of credit if you have a mortgage. It could be in a high interest savings account. I don't care, but we need to make sure that you have a buffer. And if you don't have one, that's one of the first things we focus on in terms of that cash resilience piece. We know in terms of financial success, 20% comes down to strategy, 80% comes down to behavior. That's really important. We work on both at Enable Me in terms of plan design. Again, that comes down to structure, environment, and having really clear goals. And unequivocally, we need to make sure that we have a really good wealth mindset. We're concentrating on what we want to achieve. And that strong financial foundation is vital in terms of your financial plan. And we define that really clearly. So what that looks like for me and my clients, we want to make sure that you've got really good money habits, that environmental piece. You've got to have a clear goal. What are we aspiring to? For most of my clients, they want security. They don't want to worry about money, and they want more financial freedom. They want more choice around the work they do, how long they work for, essentially. That cash flow management, cash is king always. We need to make sure that we channel it really productively. Really interesting. Lots of people I work with are really good savers. Absolutely an advantage. You cannot say it's not. More often than not, my savers tend to be a little risk averse. So my job is not to tell them how to save, it's how do they channel that surplus as productively as possible in terms of that wealth creation space. How do you be brave? How do you pounce on opportunities? And we'll unlock that again together today. Debt management is critical. We need to get rid of any kind of short, niggly debt that you might have. Having a really optimal debt reduction strategy is critical. You need to, if you have a home mortgage, and lots of my clients come to me, they have big mortgages, small mortgages. Some people haven't bought their first home yet. Often people are mortgage free. I don't care where you are in that continuum. If you have a mortgage or you're going to have a mortgage, we need to be executing on a really optimal debt reduction strategy. So one of the tools that we use for our clients is we do have that written by one of our professors at the University of Auckland that we've patented. And again, we can talk to that soon. You work really hard. Often when we are growing wealth, we rely on having the ability to work to fuel our wealth creation strategies. We need to de-risk that whilst we are growing wealth. So again, vital to have the right amount of insurance. Obviously, you don't want to pay too much, but you need to make sure that you're covered. We need to get that balance right. That's a really important risk mitigant. And again, KiwiSaver, a super useful tool. Make sure you're in the right KiwiSaver for you. And often people will come to us initially, and this is the default position. So most people, they are mortgage free at retirement. So wonderful. They've paid off their mortgage at 65. Great. But it means that they're relying on KiwiSaver in effect to help fund that lifestyle in retirement. In general, for most people, that equates to, and you can see in this example, you run out of money at 69, which means that there is a gap, there is a problem to be solved in terms of your wealth creation strategy, because we need to plug that gap of income or assets that you can sell down to facilitate funding that lifestyle gap between 69 and 90 in terms of retirement plans. So again, if you are in this position, not alone, it's just we need to be course correcting sooner rather than later in terms of what else we do to make sure that we really grow that asset position. This very busy graph, tell I'm an accountant, I love graphs. It's just showing you the important lever of having that really great mortgage strategy. Often people ask us, and we've tried to design this webinar based on, Jess is very clever, on the questions that we often get asked. So often people ask us, well, I have a mortgage, I kind of would rather invest than pay it off. It's not really bothering me. I feel like my mortgage is comparable to most. I think I'll just park that and just do what needs to be done, pay the minimum amount, and I'm going to invest. I'm not going to worry about my mortgage. You can see here how impactful it can be paying it off early. So here, just decreasing that mortgage trajectory by just 10 years. At Enable Me, our goal is to get our clients mortgage free within 10 years. That's our goal for our clients. So with this particular person, we'll get them mortgage free by 55 versus 65. And there's no tricks around this graph, which means you can save more because you're not paying that mortgage repayment every month, which means that rather than running out of money at 69, you can save more and you only run out of money at 80. A vast difference in terms of that previous slide, but that's still a problem for me and my clients, because remember, we are retired generally for a very long time. I need to get you to at least 90, so there's a 10-year gap or problem to solve. It's not as big as the problem was previously, but that lever of paying off that mortgage as fast as possible unlocks other opportunities, but also means that you can save and invest more thereafter. With a really good retirement plan, essentially, we can solve that problem in terms of investing in property or other mechanisms to make sure that we really turbocharge your asset position along the way. So that's what that very busy graph is indicating. And again, the earlier you start, the easier it is, to be honest. Not to say that you have left it too late. It just means we need bigger returns in effect. So you might have to take a little bit more risk. So here's a wee example. Again, no tricks around any of this. You have a retirement savings gap of $1 million. And you might gasp and think, $1 million, that feels like a lot. We solve for that every day though. So, and you're mortgage free by 45, you'll have 20 years of compounding returns in your retirement savings. If you're mortgage free by 55, we've got 10 years to retirement, you need 10% of compounding returns after tax. And if you're mortgage free at 65, you'll likely need to work longer or have a strategy to close the gap. So again, the earlier you start, the more time you have, which means that you can tolerate a lower return in effect, or your landing pad actually gets bigger. So again, reiterating what those wealth creation options are. We went through those at the beginning. We've all got the same options. Some are more riskier, and we'll go through that together. How do you choose the best option for you? Well, it depends on, again, the problem you're looking to solve, your savings goal, or your retirement number, the time frame you have to solve that problem, and your risk tolerance. And I'm going to show you a wee graph, just how we look at balancing risk and return. So cash has the lowest amount of risk, but it also has the lowest amount of return. Often clients will say to me, well, I know the return that I'm receiving on my cash, that feels safe, but I challenge that a little bit in terms of we've got still quite high inflation. If you've got a large portion of your asset position in cash, you're effectively banking a loss. which I argue has a risk attached to it regardless. And then we look in this continuum, there's managed funds, property, shares, and business. With every element, you could potentially make more money, but you're taking on more risk. So there's always a balance to be had. But just to be clear, the bigger the savings gap, the bigger the gain you need to receive in terms of that wealth creation. And again, lots of people ask us, is KiwiSaver still worth it? Of course. It's deducted from your pay before you see it. Great. And again, that really robust structure is what we would prefer everyone executes on in terms of bank accounts. It's contributed by your employer if you're employed, includes free money from the government. Lots of my clients, and these are the questions we often ask, what should we contribute? What fund should we be in? For a lot of my clients with a really good plan and a structure, if they're employed, they'll match what their employer's doing. If cash flow allows, it's free money, why wouldn't we? Anything over and above that, they channel into reducing debt or growing their wealth versus kind of trapping in KiwiSaver that we can't touch till we're 65. And often when they're self-employed, they'll just tip in that 1042 per year to get the government tax credit. And there's lots of pros and cons, etc., around KiwiSaver, and you make darn sure you're in the right fund for you. Right fund for you dictates really when you might need to access it. So if you're sat at 45, you can't access that for 20 years, likely it should be in a higher growth fund to maximize your returns over that time. If you are getting close to 65 and you plan to cash in that KiwiSaver, you need it really quickly, then potentially you'd be looking at lowering your risk. But again, I disclaim that everyone's different. You need to understand your retirement plan and when you might need to access different asset classes. So pros and cons of term deposits. Most favoured investment product in New Zealand, or quite risk averse really. Benefits, liquid, safe, it's passive, it's easy to execute. Time commitment for what you need it for, so you've got that certainty. Drawbacks, obviously the return is low, and when inflation is tracking high, you're just banking a loss, and you pay tax for the privilege of not earning as much as potentially you could in other investment vehicles. Not to say it's wrong, it's liquid, but again, what does your wealth strategy needs to be delivering to you in the context of your plan? Pros and cons of managed funds. So really, KiwiSaver is like a managed fund, but with more rules around it. In effect, lots of my clients invest in managed funds. They're liquid, they're diversified, many options, variety of investment styles, different levels of risk, managed on your behalf, hopefully by experts. Drawbacks, fees can be high, so that's really important when you're looking at what's the right fund type or fund provider for you. You need to look at net returns, that's really important, and sometimes there's an overwhelming array of different options available to you. Again, what fund you're in depends on when you might want to access it and your risk tolerance. So conservative, you are using it for your first home imminently, or you're planning on cashing in at 65 and you're very close there. Balanced, and again, you can see the different return rates, quite interesting, isn't it? So growth 7.46%, aggressive 7.71%. The flip side of those aggressive or growth funds is they more frequently show negative returns in terms of history because they do have more risk stacked within them. So again, all good if you can hold your line. If you can't, then likely those aren't appropriate for you. So again, where you invest in terms of that wealth creation strategy depends on the overall plan and when you might need to access them, essentially. Lots of my clients also invest in property. It's seen as one of the most stable asset classes. Rent goes up with inflation. Great. Does provide capital growth as well. It's tangible. We feel like we understand it and we can leverage, which, to be honest, is the beauty around property in my mind. Drawbacks, it's illiquid or low liquidity. Generally, it's a longer term investment. So again, age and stage, we need to be really carefully considering in the context of your overall plan if that's the right thing for you. High entry fee, yeah, not all are made equal. We think probably, you looked at the property press, maybe 10% would make a good investment property. The rest are lemons. You don't have an infinite amount of time to execute on a property strategy because quite simply the bank won't lend you money forever and a day. As you get older, it's harder to borrow money. If your retirement gap is greater than 300,000, likely you're going to have to lean into leverage in essence to bridge that gap, because that's the thing that really turbocharges that wealth creation. And again, agnostic to what you invest in, it's what is the problem we're trying to solve. And often when you're trying to grow your wealth, you more would lean into property because it outperforms other asset classes by about 300%. Not because it's amazing, or 250%, pardon me. Not because it's amazing. It's just, again, you've got gains on a bigger asset in essence. And you can see that here. So 160,000 in managed funds at 6% will return you 9,600. 160K popped in a deposit on an $800,000 property gives you gains on 800 versus 160,000. So 6% on 160 gives you 48,000. Again, it's just that you're getting growth on a bigger asset in effect, which again is why property is attractive to so many people and solves a portion of a problem in terms of how do I really maximize my asset position in effect. And you can see that in action here in terms of this bar graph, different asset classes, term deposit, Briscoes, the share market in blue, and investment property. You can see that, and this is data based on an investment of $200 per week over 10 years paid at the end of the month with no dividends or rents paid. Property figures based on the ability to leverage funds on a 20% LVR with rent covering all property costs. So that's that wee example. And again, it's just showing the power of gains over that bigger asset over time in effect. Volatility, again, less volatile asset class. Again, important to have a really robust strategy. And in all reality, lots of people have elements of lots of different things. It's just what asset class do you more lean into in terms of the problem you're trying to solve. And lots of people intrinsically know this. Property cycle in New Zealand is about 10 years. That's the length of time it takes for a property to double in value. Auckland has the shortest cycle. You go down to kind of more smaller rural towns, that cycle's generally longer. On average, it's 10 years, which means if you bought a property tomorrow for 600,000 and kept it for 10 years, it doubles. Again, no tricks around that. But sadly, you already know this. You don't bank that perfect gain in that linear fashion over that time. Generally, you see that uptick between 7 and 10. And lots of my clients, when I tell them this, they're like, oh, yeah, cool. Just tell us where, year 7 is. We'll just execute on that property strategy then. So I shine my crystal ball, because in all reality, you only know it's the bottom when it rises again, and you look back and you're like, should have bought a property. And the reason it is the bottom of the cycle is that banks become quite restrictive around lending. So even if you did time it right, the bank's likely not going to give you the funding to do so. So we always say you buy the right property for you and have the ability to hold it through a cycle. And that right property, again, depends on capacity. What might you be able to borrow? But also making sure that you understand, well, what's the likely capital gain and what is the yield or the income associated with that property, so you can hold your line through that cycle. Interesting graph showing house prices and interest rates. In all reality, interest rates are one of the biggest drivers of the interest rates of the property cycle. I mean, lots of things that feed into it, but as a very generalistic rule, when interest rates drop by 1%, property prices increase by 10%. We've finally seen the OCR go down in August, first time since 2020. It's been a long ride. So again, likely that will be quite stimulating. Again, no one has a crystal ball, and you do the right thing for you. Again, this webinar is about making sure you maximize or position yourself to take advantage of opportunities. What drives capital growth in property? Interest rate cycle, location, where is their population, investment, etc. Really important. You make money in property through capital gains. You need to make sure that's quite protective in terms of what you might do in terms of property. Migration, property type. So generally an apartment would have less capital growth than a standalone. Apartments generally have a higher yield, but the inverse to that is the cost to you is you don't get the capital return. So again, we need to make sure that as part of your plan design in terms of wealth creation options, you're leaning into the right thing at the right time. And obviously that timing piece. And again, I do not have a crystal ball. Property is one of those assets though. You don't wait to buy it, you buy it and then you wait, in effect. Not all properties perform the same. Not all properties go up by the same amount within the same time frame or cost the same to hold. So again, understanding your wealth creation strategy at a really granular level is really important. It's really important to my clients. And again, if they are looking at investing in different asset classes and we decide that we need to lean into property or there's that opportunity available to them, getting that property criteria right is critical. What do they spend up to? What does it need to deliver them from a capital gain perspective? What is the yield? Generally speaking, for my clients, it's 4% or more in terms of that yield, because again, that alleviates some pressure in terms of cash flow. But again, not a strategy that you can execute on infinitely, because the banks just won't lend you money forever and a day. As we get older, it's harder. So again, that's important in terms of, if you can, likely you should, in terms of opportunities to de-risk your position. And I spoke to a lovely client yesterday, lovely guy, and he was saying, well, I don't want lots of debt. That feels like I'm taking on lots of risk. I'm just not that kind of guy. Totally accept that. But I suppose in the same breath, you understand, well, he was mortgage free in 2 properties in New Zealand. The cost to him of not executing on potentially buying another property as part of his wealth creation strategy is that equity is just sat within that 2 properties doing nothing. So he's lost the capital appreciation of another property through that next asset cycle. So again, absolutely you don't need to do anything. There are lots of options available to you. It's just what's right for you and your plan, and what is the cost of inaction, because that's really important. There is a cost to inaction, and lots of people think that if they just focus on one thing, if they say they're being safe, you cannot save yourself to wealth. You can't. Again, it's how do I lean into different strategies to really maximize my position. And to achieve growth, you just need the right property, and that changes. I really challenge my clients, and there's been an old adage in New Zealand for a very long time is, you buy a property and you sit on it infinitely. That's not the case, certainly for my clients. You buy the right property, you hold it through a cycle, and then you look to think, well, is that the right use of that capital through that next cycle? So they're active holders in effect. There are risks with any strategy. Buying the wrong property with the wrong capital growth rate or yield, committing to too high a weekly top up. So again, remember, it's about having the ability to hold your line through a cycle, because there's ebbs and flows in any cycle. We've seen this all before there, but again, you need to be able to hold your line so your hand is never forced in terms of having to sell that asset when it dips, in effect. Working with the wrong builder, really important to work with people that you trust and not building in cash flow contingencies. Secret sauce to successful property investing: you secure the lending, you have sufficient cash flow surplus. That cash flow piece, again, that's the engine room of anything that happens thereafter. You've got the right hold strategy. And again, the closer you are to retirement, you need to be really careful in terms of anything you do, in effect, because again, you've worked hard, really hard to course correct at this point. You've got to make sure that what you're executing is the right thing for you, and the time frame is appropriate, because remember, property is that kind of longer term investment. Doesn't mean it's the wrong thing. Again, it's what is the design of your plan and what is the problem we need to solve, and we just need to ensure the closer you are to retirement, that we've balanced that out with asset classes that are giving you liquidity into. That could be managed funds, etc. We understand that in the context of your retirement number, your plan, and your needs. You buy the right property for your circumstances and goals, and you've got to be cash flow resilient. That buffer piece is really important. Again, just to bring this to life in terms of that property piece, because we got lots of questions prior to this webinar around property. These are lovely clients, Jim and Kathy, 51 and 55, retirement gap of 550k. For them, they bought a 3-bedroom home in Papamoa in 2020. Purchase price was 665. CV now is 860. It actually did go up a little bit more, but obviously come down a little bit. So it's 195k of capital growth. If they hold it for another 10 years, they'll be able to close that retirement gap. So just kind of bringing that to life with a real example. But the best approach for you depends on your time frames, your goals, what are you trying to achieve, your risk appetite. And I find with my clients, they're often braver when they have a plan, they're working with an expert, and they understand the consequences of not executing on a particular action, and they're making sure they're as resilient as possible. It just makes you braver, and you do the right thing at the right time. Your cash flow requirements: flexibility, ability to access mortgage lending, access to equity, and that wealth goal, which allows you to transition into retirement and stretch your funds further. So I really talked at pace because I wanted to take my time in terms of questions. So I'm just going to reiterate key takeaways. Consider the problem you're trying to solve. What is your retirement number? How long do we have to save for it? When will you be mortgage free? What are the options and the levers available to you to make sure that you land where you need to? Understand the requirements of your investments. And again, not one asset class solves all problems. For most people, they need a balanced approach, but there are definite levers in terms of strategy that do turbocharge or accelerate the pace of wealth creation. So again, you need to understand that. Again, if you have 10 years, 5 years, 20 years, just changes how you execute on strategies and what you might lean into. Risk preferences, and I work with people at all edge of risk, super risk averse, to quite reckless, to quite frank. So again, it's understanding what do you need, what is the risk you need to be executing around in terms of your plan. And I think it's really important to have a trusted expert or sounding board in your corner, super important. So in terms of that trusted expert, if there is anything that you would like to unpack in terms of your own situation, if you do want that independent assessment of where things are at now, whether you're on track or not, and what you should be leaning into, I'd really encourage you to come along for an initial consultation with a coach like myself. We're up and down the country. We do virtual consults. An initial session with somebody like myself is 90 minutes. It's usually 400, but for tonight, we've discounted it to 149. Which is amazing, but you need to book it tonight. It's just for live attendees. So if you watch this back tomorrow, or if you choose to book after tomorrow, we'll still discount it for you down to 249. But it's just tonight. We've got that one-off special. And how you get that, you just have to scan the QR code or go to Enable Me Wealth Creation Katie, and you will be able to take advantage of that. 90 minutes, you jump on the scales. Again, we go over where are you at now, whether you want to be, are you on track, or could you be better in terms of that wealth creation opportunity. So questions, Jess?
Thank you so much, Katie, for the insightful presentation as always. Yeah, let's get through some questions.
Right.
We had quite a few responses, which was great to hear. I'm going to merge two of them together, one that came through live and one that's come through previously. But so the first question was, how much equity on your mortgage do you need to buy a house? But then the second question is it a good idea to maximize the equity in your home to purchase an investment property, or is that too risky? So I wondered if you could speak to both of those.
Yeah, so how it works is, so when you have a home, you can generally, and so there's different gateways. So what we'll do is we'll talk about equity, because that's really what the question is about, but I'm going to caveat that with other things that might scupper you in terms of journey. So when you're looking at equity, you can borrow up to 80% of your home value in lending from an equity perspective. So $1 million, you can borrow up to 800,000. If your mortgage is, say, 200,000, so that means that you could borrow an extra 600,000 attached to that one property as a deposit on something else. So I'm going to sneakily use my calculator because it's late at night and I've had lots of client meetings today. So that's 600,000. If you were to buy a new build property, for example, which requires a 20% deposit, would mean that, not that you would, but you could, from an equity perspective, buy up to 3 million of property using that 600K as a 20% deposit in effect. So that's, again, from an equity perspective. The caveat on that is if you build an existing dwelling, you could borrow less. Equity is one gateway. The banks will also look at serviceability, cash in, cash out, what's left over. So that generally hampers what you could borrow. For most people, if you do have access to additional lending to buy another property, likely you should. Again, if cash flow allows, particularly at this edge of the market in terms of interest rates coming down, but again, you just be really careful in terms of what you buy, because again, it's not about buying any property, and it depends on, again, how long you have to retirement, etc. And again, that property criteria is critical. What does it need to deliver to you, and what is the yield so you can keep the thing, essentially. Does that make sense, Jess?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Katie. The next question is the property the only way to close the gap? My problem with property is the moral issues with being a landlord apart from all the work.
Yeah, I absolutely get that. And no. And To be honest, lots of my clients have elements of lots of different things. Lots of people might invest in where they work through shares, etc. Lots of my clients invest in managed funds. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, again, you're not leveraging, which again gives you that generally higher pace of capital growth in essence. And I totally understand the ethical piece. Lots of clients say, well, it was so hard for me to get on the property ladder. I am not taking properties away from first home buyers. I absolutely get that. But in the same breath, for most of my clients, in terms of how they invest, non-negotiable, they're really ethical, and likely if we are leaning into that property space, generally speaking, they will buy new build properties. In terms of they will build those new properties, which we so dearly need, let's be honest, in New Zealand, for people to rent in effect, which are well insulated, etc. And I really like that. I think that's really an ethical way of investing, and really making sure that they solve a problem in terms of we do not have good enough housing stock in New Zealand for our population, but also making sure they're maximising opportunities for them and their family in terms of being able to look after themselves or to help their children in retirement. I think that's a really important balance to be had. Of course, you do it ethically, and I don't think very few people aspire to be landlords, but most people want to make sure that they're going to be sorted and they're looking after themselves for retirement. Lots of people want to have the ability to help their kids, and not be a drain on anyone else as well. So again, yeah, you do things ethically, and it's how you do it. It's the how that's important.
Thank you, Katie. So the next question comes from a fellow Enable Me client. So the question is, after listening to you, I'm thinking about what next once my mortgage is paid off. How can Enable Me support me in the next steps if I want to get into property investing?
Yeah. And in terms of when you do this, I always say to my clients, it's really important, and well done in terms of getting near to that, paying off that mortgage. That's absolutely fantastic. That's our bread and butter in terms of Enable Me clients. But again, we want to keep you light on your feet. And when that mortgage is coming down at pace, you are creating equity, and likely you should be tapping into that to do something else. And we'll help you define what that looks like in terms of property criteria, i.e. what you should be buying, if it's right for you, your cash flow tolerance, etc. So we'll get really clear on your retirement number. We'll help extrapolate that, and we'll understand really clearly that property criteria. What do we spend up to? What does it need to deliver to you? And what is the yield or the cash flow, so that we can hold our line? What does that look like in terms of buffer? How you would structure that mortgage? If you do have still, it sounds like you've still got a smidge of a mortgage, whatever that quantum might be, that's still our focus. Any lending on an investment property, likely that should be interest only, because we'll still focus on clearing down that mortgage as fast as possible. Why is that? The lending will be tax deductible on that rental property versus your home. It's just dead money for us. So that's what we'd focus on first, which again allows us more cash flow to do other things.
Thank you, Katie.
You're welcome.
The next question, what are your suggestions for somebody on maternity leave for a year, no income other than the government contributions, to continue building their wealth?
Yeah. There are seasons, aren't there? I've got 3 kiddies. I remember being on maternity leave very well, and often being on maternity leave, I think it's about the season of kind of holding your ground and trying not to go backwards often. And I think it's getting really good and clear around cash flow and making sure within that period of maternity leave, you're setting up really good structures in terms of bank accounts, cash flow planning. So when you are earning and working, creating more cash flow, then you're ready to pounce on other wealth creation opportunities, such as investing, paying off debt faster. That's what I would be focusing on in terms of getting that foundation as strong as possible whilst you are on maternity leave.
Thanks so much, Katie. A couple more questions to tick off. So I think we've got enough time for just, one or two more.
Yeah, great.
The next one is, should I pay off my mortgage entirely before starting to invest in shares?
For most people, they do it concurrently in terms of investing. Again, it's what is the return those shares are going to give you, and that's really important in terms of focus. And so even when the good old days when interest rates were at 4%, lots of people would challenge me and say, well, I'm just going to focus on investing versus clearing debt at pace because my mortgage is only 4%. Remember, when you invest, you would have to be earning double that in terms of return, because remember, you take off tax, you take off fees, etc., in terms of returns. So again, having that really good, clear debt reduction strategy is really important. So again, it depends on returns. The question was around shares. So again, that's the math I'd be working out in my head. In terms of if the question had been, do I wait and pay off my mortgage to invest in property? I would say absolutely not, because again, if you have access to, likely you should. And again, if you say, well, I'm just going to focus for the next 10 years on just paying down my debt, the cost to you of that is you don't have the capital appreciation of another property through that next cycle. So again, always a balance to be had, and everyone's different. But those are the kind of the numbers and the rationale and the math that I work out when I'm looking at my client's plan. Make sense, Jess?
Yes, thank you for that. Probably have time for one more question. So I'm very sorry for those who we couldn't get to tonight, but please message us or give us a call tomorrow with your burning questions. But yeah, we've only got time for so many, so we'll go into it. The final question is, what are your thoughts on investing in residential versus commercial versus Airbnb properties?
Question to end on, Jess.
Sorry.
Great question. Thank you very much. That is a great question. And again, nothing is wrong or right. It sounds like such a cop-out. I'm sick of myself. Okay, again, some generalizations. Let's go with that first. And in all reality, lots of my clients would invest in all three. Really quickly, because we're running out of time, commercial versus residential. Residential generally is more accessible to most people. It's easier to get lending. Why is that? You need a lower deposit in equity generally. Your loans can be over 30 years, much shorter commercial. And in terms of residential lending, you can have it on interest only, which has a cash flow advantage to it. You cannot. Over commercial, you have to pay principal and interest over a shorter time. So even though, generally speaking, you might get a higher return in terms of rental yield, that can be gobbled up, not a technical term, in terms of what you need to pay on that mortgage, because you must pay principal and interest. So that would be my main thinking in terms of which is right. Resi, you have more access because you need a lower deposit. You can lend over 30 years. You can have it on interest only. So that's generally has a better cash flow impact in terms of people's situation. And generally residential is seen as less risky than commercial at times, because often the commercial proposition is the value of the property is sometimes tied into the quality of the tenant, in fact. So if a tenant moves out, that can be a problem if it's hard to get a tenant into that particular property, because there's a smaller pool of tenants versus all people with resi properties, in essence. Where lots of my clients, it does work exceptionally well, is when they have a business and that's they're the tenant in effect, so that can work really well. So again, I'm talking general principles. It depends on the plan. Airbnb, lots of my clients have Airbnb properties. The bank don't like them. They're not seen as favourable because they like having tenancy agreements. Do you know, they don't like I get it, they don't like the lumpy nature in terms of income, so it sometimes can be harder to access income, and you've got to make darn sure in terms of Airbnb that you understand your numbers and you have good buffers, because it will be lumpy. You know, generally speaking, summer's better, or actually for my clients who have rentals in Queenstown, actually that's all year, but yeah, likely a bit better in the winter. So again, generally seasonal, so you've got to make sure you have good buffers. So no, and again, general principles of what we've said, nothing is wrong or right definitively for all people. It is what will serve you in the context of your plan, and everyone is different. My job for my clients is to make sure that we design that strategy to de-risk your position, but also to make sure that we're maximizing opportunities, and that's what we focus on in terms of that overall holistic plan.
Thank you so much,
28,
Katie.
Jess.
That's probably all the time we have. So apologies again if we didn't get to your question. Please email us or give us a call. But I'll hand it back to you, Katie, to close off for us.
Amazing. So I hope you've enjoyed tonight. We really tried to focus on getting through lots of questions. I'm so sorry we didn't get through them all. There were just so many, but we actually did change. Jess, you did an amazing job. The design of tonight to try and be really targeted in terms of the questions that we did have. I know I've talked a lot. Always got so much to say, and there's so much more I could say. I hope you've got some gold nuggets. I hope you caught the right ones, but 1% is around the knowing, 99% is around the execution in terms of growing wealth. Really important, doing what needs to be done at the right time, and that's what I really hope you focus on into the future. And if you need help, please reach out. All the very best. Take care.